In the golden halls of Valdoria Palace, where silk whispers secrets and diamonds hide lies, Captain Marcus Kane thought he knew his place. For 15 years he had served the royal family with unwavering loyalty, his sword ready to defend the crown at any cost.
But when he witnessed Lady Evangeline Ashford spit in the face of 12-year-old Princess Isabella during a grand ceremony, everything he believed about honor, duty, and justice would be shattered forever. What started as a simple act of disciplining a disrespectful noblewoman would spiral into a web of conspiracy, betrayal, and shocking revelations that would shake the very foundations of the kingdom.
Some secrets are worth killing for. And in the Palace of Valdoria, Captain Kane is about to discover that the greatest threats to the crown don't always come from outside the walls. When loyalty collides with truth, and duty battles conscience, how far would you go to protect what you believe is right? In a world where one wrong move could mean death, Captain Marcus Kane is about to find out. The morning sun cast long shadows across the marble floors of Valdoria Palace, as Captain Marcus Kane adjusted his ceremonial armor one final time. The golden eagles embroidered on his chest plate caught the light, a symbol of his 15 years of faithful service to the crown. Today was the Harvest Festival ceremony, one of the most important events in the royal calendar, and everything had to be perfect. Marcus surveyed the great hall with a practiced eye. 200 nobles filled the ornate space, their silks and jewels creating a rainbow of colors beneath the crystal chandeliers. At the far end on the raised dais sat King Edmund and Queen Victoria, with their 12-year-old daughter, Princess Isabella, between them. The young princess wore a tiara of sapphires that matched her bright blue dress, her golden hair braided with ribbons. She looked every inch the future queen she was destined to become. "Captain Kane," called Lieutenant William Thorne, Marcus's second-in-command, as he approached with quick steps. "The final security sweep is complete, all clear." Marcus nodded, his dark eyes continuing to scan the crowd. After years of protecting the royal family, he had developed an instinct for trouble. Something felt off today, though he couldn't quite put his finger on what it was. The usual suspects were all present: Lord Chancellor Blackwood with his permanent scowl, the ambitious Duke of Northbridge eyeing the throne with barely concealed hunger, and the wealthy merchants trying to buy their way into noble circles. "Keep the men alert," Marcus instructed William. "I want extra guards near the dais and make sure the exit routes are clear." As the ceremony began, Marcus positioned himself at the side of the hall where he could watch both the crowd and the royal family. King Edmund rose to address the gathering, his voice carrying easily across the vast space as he spoke of the kingdom's prosperity and the importance of unity. The nobles listened with polite attention, though Marcus noticed several whispered conversations and sidelong glances. It was during the princess's presentation of the ceremonial harvest crown that everything went wrong. Princess Isabella had just accepted the golden wreath from the high priest when Lady Evangeline Ashford stepped forward from the crowd. Marcus recognized her immediately. She was the widow of the late Earl of Westmere, known for her sharp tongue and bitter disposition since her husband's death 3 years ago. Her black hair was streaked with silver, and her green eyes burned with an intensity that made Marcus instinctively move closer to the dais. "Your Royal Highness," Lady Evangeline called out, her voice cutting through the ceremonial music. The hall fell silent as all eyes turned to her. "I have something that belongs to you." She reached into her silk purse and withdrew what appeared to be a letter, sealed with red wax. Princess Isabella looked confused, glancing at her parents for guidance. King Edmund frowned, clearly displeased by the interruption. "Lady Ashford," the king said with careful authority, "this is neither the time nor the place for personal matters. Please return to your seat." But Lady Evangeline ignored the king entirely. Instead, she walked directly toward Princess Isabella, her heels clicking on the marble floor like gunshots in the silence. Marcus felt his hand instinctively move to his sword hilt. "This letter," Lady Evangeline said, her voice rising with each word, "contains the truth about your precious royal bloodline. The truth about what your father really is." The words hit the hall like a physical blow. Gasps echoed from the crowd, and Marcus saw several nobles exchange alarmed glances. Queen Victoria had gone pale, her knuckles white as she gripped her chair. "Enough!" King Edmund roared, rising from his throne. "Guards, remove this woman immediately." But Lady Evangeline wasn't finished. As Marcus and 2 other guards moved toward her, she did something that shocked everyone in the hall. She looked directly at 12-year-old Princess Isabella and spat in her face. The princess cried out in shock and horror, her hand flying to her cheek as tears began to stream down her face. Queen Victoria screamed and rushed to her daughter's side, while King Edmund's face turned purple with rage. "How dare you," the king bellowed. "How dare you assault my daughter?" Marcus reached Lady Evangeline first, his strong hands seizing her arms. But instead of showing fear or remorse, she smiled coldly at him. "Ask him about the night Lord Westmere died," she hissed, her eyes boring into Marcus's. "Ask him about the real reason my husband was murdered. Ask him about the letter he's been desperately trying to find for 3 years. "That's enough," Marcus said firmly, beginning to drag her away from the dais. But Lady Evangeline's voice carried clearly across the hall. "The princess isn't his daughter," she screamed. "Edmund killed my husband to hide the truth, but I have proof. I have the letter that proves everything." The hall erupted in chaos. Nobles began shouting and pushing, some trying to get closer to hear more, others attempting to flee, what was clearly becoming a dangerous situation. Marcus fought to maintain his grip on Lady Evangeline as she continued to struggle and shout accusations. "Silence her," King Edmund commanded, his voice cracking with emotion. "Get her out of here now." Marcus finally managed to subdue Lady Evangeline, but not before she managed one final devastating blow. She threw the letter she had been holding directly at Princess Isabella. The young girl, still crying and shaken, instinctively caught it. "Read it," Lady Evangeline shouted as Marcus dragged her toward the exit. "Read it and learn the truth about your precious father." As they reached the doors of the great hall, Marcus caught sight of Princess Isabella looking down at the letter in her small hands. Her face was streaked with tears, and still showed the shock of being spat upon. But there was something else in her expression now. Curiosity. Before her parents could stop her, she broke the red wax seal. Marcus was forced to focus on removing Lady Evangeline from the hall, but he could hear the continued chaos behind him. Nobles were shouting questions, guards were trying to restore order, and through it all, he could hear King Edmund's voice demanding that everyone remain calm. Once outside the great hall, Marcus handed Lady Evangeline over to Lieutenant Thorne and 4 other guards. She had stopped struggling now, but the cold smile never left her face. "Take her to the dungeon," Marcus ordered. "Maximum security. No visitors without my direct permission." As the guards led her away, Lady Evangeline called back to Marcus. "You're a good man, Captain Kane. When you learn the truth, I hope you'll remember that. The kingdom needs good men like you in the dark days that are coming." Marcus watched her disappear down the corridor, her words echoing in his mind. He had served the royal family faithfully for 15 years. He had sworn an oath to protect them with his life. But something about Lady Evangeline's certainty, the conviction in her voice, unsettled him deeply. He returned to the great hall to find it in complete disarray. Many of the nobles had left, whispering among themselves as they hurried away. Others remained, clustered in small groups, their voices low but urgent. At the front of the hall, the royal family had withdrawn to their private chambers, leaving only the guards to deal with the aftermath. Lieutenant Thorne approached Marcus with a grim expression. "Sir, what are your orders regarding Lady Ashford? The king wants her charged with treason for assaulting the princess." Marcus nodded slowly, though his mind was racing. "Follow protocol. Document everything that happened here today, every word she spoke, every reaction from the crowd. And William," he paused, meeting his second-in-command's eyes, "I want you to discreetly investigate Lady Evangeline's claims about Lord Westmere's death. Nothing official, just look into it." William raised an eyebrow. "Sir, are you sure that's wise? If the king discovers we're investigating his potential involvement in a lord's death, then we'll be very careful," Marcus said firmly. "But a woman doesn't spit in a princess's face and accuse the king of murder without some reason to believe her claims. We need to know what we're dealing with." As the great hall was slowly cleared and cleaned, Marcus remained behind, staring at the spot where Lady Evangeline had made her shocking accusations. In 15 years of service, he had never questioned the royal family's integrity. They had always seemed above reproach, noble and just rulers devoted to their kingdom's welfare. But now, doubt had been planted like a seed in his mind. Lady Evangeline's words echoed in his memory. "The kingdom needs good men like you in the dark days that are coming." What if she was right? What if there was truth to her accusations? Marcus had sworn an oath to protect the crown, but what if the crown itself was built on lies and murder? That evening, as Marcus made his rounds through the palace, he found himself walking past the royal chambers. Through a partially open door, he could hear voices, King Edmund and Queen Victoria speaking in urgent, hushed tones. "She has to be silenced," the king was saying.
"Permanently. We cannot allow these accusations to spread."
"But Edmund, if people start investigating Westmere's death," the queen's voice was worried, fearful. "Then we'll deal with that when it happens. Right now, we need to focus on containing this situation." The letter Isabella read, Marcus couldn't hear the rest as footsteps approached the door. He quickly moved away, his heart pounding. The fragments of conversation he had overheard seemed to confirm Lady Evangeline's worst accusations. The royal couple were discussing silencing her permanently, which could only mean one thing. As he returned to his chambers that night, Marcus faced the most difficult decision of his life. He had always believed that loyalty meant following orders without question, trusting that those above him were acting in the kingdom's best interest. But what if loyalty to the crown meant betraying everything he truly believed in? He thought of Princess Isabella's innocent face streaked with tears and marked by a stranger's spit. She was just a child, caught in the middle of adult conspiracies she couldn't possibly understand. If Lady Evangeline's accusations were true, then Isabella herself might be in danger. Marcus made his decision. Tomorrow, he would begin his own investigation into Lord Westmere's death. He would uncover the truth about Lady Evangeline's claims, whatever that truth might be. And if he discovered that the royal family he had served so faithfully was built on lies and murder, he would have to decide where his true loyalty lay, with the crown or with justice itself. As he lay in his narrow military cot that night, Marcus Kane could not have imagined that his decision would set in motion events that would change the kingdom forever. The seeds of rebellion had been planted in the most unlikely place, in the heart of the crown's most faithful defender. Outside his window, storm clouds were gathering on the horizon, and the first drops of rain began to fall like tears on the palace walls. The harvest festival was over, but the real harvest, a harvest of secrets, lies, and long-buried truths, was just beginning. The dungeon beneath Valdoria Palace had not been used for political prisoners in over 30 years. As Captain Marcus Kane descended the narrow stone steps 3 days after the Harvest Festival incident, the musty smell of dampness and decay filled his nostrils. The torches mounted on the walls cast flickering shadows that danced like ghosts across the ancient stones. Lady Evangeline Ashford sat in the farthest cell, her once elegant black dress now wrinkled and stained. Despite her circumstances, she maintained an air of dignity that impressed Marcus. When she saw him approaching, she rose from the straw-covered bench and moved to the iron bars. "Captain Kane," she said, her voice steady despite 3 days of imprisonment. "I wondered when you would come to see me." Marcus stopped just outside her cell, studying her face in the torchlight. "I've come to hear your story, Lady Ashford. All of it," she smiled sadly. "Even knowing it might change everything you believe about the royal family you've served so faithfully." "Especially because of that," Marcus replied. "Tell me about Lord Westmere's death." Lady Evangeline was quiet for a long moment, her green eyes distant with memory. When she finally spoke, her voice carried the weight of 3 years of grief and burning anger. "My husband was the king's closest friend since childhood," she began. "They grew up together, trained together, even courted the same women before Edmund became king and married Victoria. Richard trusted him completely." She moved to the small window high on the cell wall, though it showed only darkness. 3 years ago, Richard discovered something that shattered that trust. He was reviewing the royal treasury records. He was the king's treasurer, you understand, when he found discrepancies. Large sums of money being diverted to secret accounts, payments being made to people whose names weren't in any official records. Marcus felt his pulse quicken. "What kind of payments?" At first, Richard thought it might be legitimate intelligence work. Kings need spies, after all. But when he investigated further, he discovered the money was being used for something far more sinister. Lady Evangeline turned back to face Marcus, her eyes blazing with intensity. "The king was paying to have people killed." The words hung in the air like a physical presence. Marcus found himself gripping the iron bars of the cell. "What people?" "Anyone who threatened his reign. Political rivals who gained too much influence. Merchants who refused to pay his extorted bribes. Even some of his own nobles who asked too many questions about his policies." She paused, her voice dropping to a whisper. But the worst discovery was yet to come. Marcus waited, though every instinct told him he didn't want to hear what came next. Richard found evidence that the king had arranged Queen Victoria's first husband's death. The revelation hit Marcus like a physical blow. Queen Victoria had been married before to Lord James Montclair, who had died in what was officially recorded as a hunting accident 6 months before she married Edmund. Princess Isabella had been born exactly 9 months after the royal wedding, which had always seemed like a blessing from heaven. Lord Montclair was killed so that Edmund could marry Victoria and legitimize his claim to her unborn child, Lady Evangeline continued. "My husband found correspondence between the king and the assassin, payments made through those same secret accounts." "You're saying Princess Isabella is not the king's daughter?" "She's James Montclair's daughter." Edmund killed her real father and married her mother to claim her as his own heir. Lady Evangeline's voice shook with emotion. When Richard confronted him with the evidence, Edmund didn't even try to deny it. Instead, he begged my husband to keep the secret, promised him anything he wanted. Marcus began to pace in the narrow corridor outside the cell. The implications were staggering. If this was true, then the entire royal line was built on murder and fraud. Princess Isabella, innocent as she was, had no legitimate claim to the throne. Why didn't Lord Westmere expose him immediately? Because Richard was a good man who believed in stability above all else. He feared that revealing the truth would plunge the kingdom into civil war. Instead, he agreed to keep the secret on one condition: that Edmund would cease all his illegal activities immediately. No more assassinations, no more extortion, no more corruption. Lady Evangeline laughed bitterly. My naive husband actually believed the king would honor such an agreement, but he didn't.
Within months, Richard discovered that Edmund had simply become more careful about hiding his crimes.
The payments continued, just through different channels. People continued to die mysteriously.
And when Richard realized he had been played for a fool, he decided to gather more evidence and expose everything. Marcus stopped pacing and looked directly at Lady Evangeline. What happened to that evidence? The night before Richard was supposed to meet with the High Council to present his findings, he was found dead in his study. Officially, it was ruled a heart attack brought on by stress from his treasury work. Her voice hardened, but I knew better. I knew Edmund had poisoned him. The pieces of the puzzle were falling into place in Marcus's mind, but he needed more details. If Lord Westmere was preparing to expose the king, what happened to all his evidence? That's where Edmund made his mistake, Lady Evangeline said with satisfaction. He assumed that all of Richard's evidence was in his study, so he had his agents search it thoroughly the night of the murder. But my husband was cleverer than that. He had hidden copies of the most damaging documents somewhere else.
Where?
In our summer estate, in a secret compartment he had built into the library wall. After the funeral, I went there and found everything. Correspondence with assassins, treasury records showing the diverted funds, even a letter James Montclair had written to Victoria just before his death, expressing his excitement about their coming child. Marcus felt his legs grow weak. You have all of this evidence? I had it, Lady Evangeline corrected. For 3 years I'd been gathering additional proof. Documenting more of Edmund's crimes, building an unshakable case. But I knew that simply presenting it to the authorities wouldn't work. Too many of them are either corrupted by Edmund or too frightened to act against him. So you decided to force his hand publicly, Marcus realized. The scene at the Harvest Festival. I had hoped that presenting the evidence in front of 200 nobles would make it impossible for Edmund to suppress the truth. If enough people saw Montclair's letter, if they understood what it meant, she trailed off, shaking her head. But I underestimated his control over the situation. Marcus was quiet for several minutes, processing everything he had heard. Finally, he asked the question that had been haunting him since that night. Where is all this evidence now? Lady Evangeline's expression grew troubled. That's what worries me, Captain. The morning after the festival, before I was brought here, Edmund's agents raided both my city mansion and my summer estate. They took everything, every document, every letter, every piece of evidence I had spent 3 years collecting. Everything?
Not quite everything,
He said with a slight smile. There was one document I always kept with me, sewn into the lining of my traveling cloak. A letter from Richard to me, written the night before he died. In it, he names Edmund as his murderer and provides details about where he had hidden additional evidence. Marcus leaned forward eagerly. Where? In the royal archives, of all places. Richard reasoned that the safest place to hide evidence against the king would be in the king's own record-keeping system, misfiled among thousands of other documents where no one would think to look. The irony was not lost on Marcus. Do you know where specifically? The letter contains coded references that would allow someone to find the documents, but... Lady Evangeline hesitated. Captain Kane, I need to ask you something first. Why are you here? Why are you listening to my story instead of simply following the king's orders to keep me locked away until my execution? It was a fair question, and Marcus realized he owed her an honest answer. Because I overheard something that night, the king and queen discussing how to permanently silence you. And because he paused, struggling with words, Because a woman doesn't spit in a child's face and accuse a king of murder unless she believes absolutely in her cause. Lady Evangeline studied his face carefully. You served Edmund faithfully for 15 years. If what I'm telling you is true, it means your entire adult life has been built on serving a lie. Are you prepared for that possibility? Marcus thought of Princess Isabella's innocent face, marked by a stranger's spit and streaked with tears. He thought of the king's rage and the queen's fear that night. Most of all, he thought of his oath as a soldier, not just to protect the crown, but to protect the innocent and uphold justice. I'm prepared to learn the truth, whatever it might be, he said firmly.
Lady Evangeline nodded slowly, then reached inside her dress and withdrew a small, tightly folded piece of parchment. This is Richard's final letter.
If you're truly committed to uncovering the truth, this will guide you to the evidence. But Captain, her voice grew urgent. Once you read this, there will be no going back. Edmund will kill anyone who threatens to expose him, even his most loyal captain. Marcus took the letter with steady hands. How do I know you're telling the truth about any of this? How do I know this isn't an elaborate plot to destroy the royal family?
You don't, Lady Evangeline admitted.
You'll have to decide whether to trust me or trust the king who ordered your men to poison me 3 days ago. Marcus stared at her in shock. What? The food they've been bringing me has been laced with small amounts of foxglove. Not enough to kill me quickly, but enough to weaken me gradually. By the end of the week, it would appear that I had died of illness brought on by the stress of imprisonment. She smiled grimly. Fortunately for me, my late husband taught me to recognize the signs of various poisons, a skill that proved invaluable given his own cause of death. The revelation filled Marcus with cold fury. He had given specific orders that Lady Evangeline was to be kept safe and secure until her trial. If someone was trying to poison her, it could only be on orders from the very top. Who has been bringing your food? A guard named Garrett, I believe. A nervous young man who won't meet my eyes. Marcus knew Garrett well, a recent recruit who was desperate to prove himself to his superiors. Exactly the type of man who might follow questionable orders without asking too many questions. Lady Ashford, I need you to stop eating the food they bring you. I'll arrange for different meals to be delivered by guards I trust. You believe me then? Marcus looked down at the letter in his hands, then back at the woman who had risked everything to expose what she believed was a terrible truth. I believe you enough to investigate your claims properly. If you're lying, I'll discover it. If you're telling the truth, he paused, the implications washing over him. If you're telling the truth, then this kingdom is in more danger than anyone realizes. As Marcus climbed the stone steps back to the palace proper, his mind was racing with plans and possibilities. He would need to be extremely careful if Lady Evangeline was right about the king's willingness to murder anyone who threatened him, then Marcus's own life was now at risk. But he thought again of Princess Isabella, and of the oath he had sworn 15 years ago. Justice was more important than personal safety, and truth was more valuable than comfortable lies. The letter felt heavy in his pocket as he walked through the palace halls, past tapestries and portraits celebrating the glorious history of the royal family. By tomorrow night, he might know whether that history was built entirely on blood and deception. The real investigation was about to begin.
Captain Marcus Kane waited until well after midnight before making his way to the royal archives. The ancient library deep beneath the palace had been built by the first kings of Valdoria centuries ago, its stone walls lined with thousands of documents chronicling the kingdom's history.
During the day, scribes and scholars worked here under the supervision of Master Archivist Benedict, but at night it was empty except for the occasional mouse scurrying between the shelves. Marcus carried only a single candle to light his way, knowing that too much illumination might attract unwanted attention from the guards patrolling the upper levels. Lord Westmere's letter, which he had read and memorized a dozen times, contained cryptic references to the location of the hidden evidence. The code was clever. References to the chronicles of the Third Dynasty, and beneath the accounts of the Golden Harvest. That would mean nothing to a casual observer but provided specific directions to someone who understood the archive's organization system. As he moved deeper into the vast underground chamber, Marcus found himself thinking about the conversation he'd had with Lieutenant William Thorne earlier that evening. William had reported back on his discreet investigation into Lord Westmere's death, and the findings had been disturbing. The official report says Lord Westmere died of heart failure, William had said, keeping his voice low even though they were alone in Marcus's quarters. But I spoke to Dr. Aldrich, who examined the body. He's retired now and living quietly outside the city, so he felt free to speak more openly than he might have 3 years ago. Marcus had leaned forward, sensing important information coming. Dr. Aldrich said Lord Westmere's symptoms were consistent with heart failure, but there were some unusual aspects. The Lord's fingernails had a slight blue tinge, and there were tiny hemorrhages in his eyes, signs that could indicate poisoning rather than natural heart failure. Why didn't he include that in his official report? William had looked uncomfortable. He said that when he mentioned his concerns to the king's personal physician, he was told that speculation about poisoning would be harmful to the kingdom's stability. He was encouraged to keep his doubts to himself. Now, as Marcus searched through the archives by candlelight, Dr. Aldrich's suppressed concerns seemed like another piece of evidence supporting Lady Evangeline's accusations. The deeper he dug, the more the official story began to crumble. Following Lord Westmere's coded directions, Marcus found himself in a section of the archives dedicated to financial records from the Third Dynasty, the time period when the current royal line had first taken power. These documents were rarely accessed, covered in dust and showing their age. It was the perfect place to hide something that needed to remain undiscovered. According to the letter, the evidence was hidden beneath the accounts of the Golden Harvest. Marcus ran his fingers along the shelf until he found a thick ledger with that exact title, a record of grain production from 2 centuries ago. When he lifted the heavy book, he discovered that its pages had been carefully hollowed out, creating a secret compartment. Inside, wrapped in oiled cloth to protect it from moisture, was a collection of documents that made Marcus's blood run cold. The first was a letter in King Edmund's own handwriting addressed to someone identified only as the Shadow. The contents were damning. Detailed instructions for the assassination of Lord James Montclair, including specific directions about making the death appear to be a hunting accident. The letter included payment arrangements and even discussed the timing. It had to happen before Victoria's pregnancy became too obvious, but not so early as to arouse suspicion. Marcus sat heavily on a stone bench, the letter trembling in his hands. Here was absolute proof that Lady Evangeline's most serious accusation was true. King Edmund had indeed murdered Queen Victoria's first husband to claim his child as his own heir. But there was more. The next document was a treasury record in Lord Westmere's careful handwriting, documenting the creation of secret accounts used to fund what the late Lord had labeled assassination operations. Names, dates, amounts. Everything was meticulously recorded. Marcus recognized some of the names as nobles and merchants who had died in supposedly accidental circumstances over the past 5 years. One entry made him gasp aloud. 6 months ago, Duke Harrison of Eastmere had died when his carriage plunged off a mountain road during a storm. The official investigation had concluded that the wheel broke due to poor maintenance. But according to Westmere's records, the king had paid 3,000 gold pieces to arrange mechanical failure of the Duke's transport. Marcus remembered Duke Harrison well. He had been a vocal critic of the king's tax policies and had been gathering support among the other nobles for reform. His death had effectively ended the growing opposition movement. As he continued reading, a horrifying picture emerged. Over the past 7 years, King Edmund had systematically eliminated anyone who posed a threat to his rule. Political opponents, financial rivals, even servants who had overheard too much. All had met mysterious deaths that were carefully arranged to appear accidental or natural. The final document was perhaps the most shocking of all. It was a letter from Queen Victoria to Lord James Montclair, written just days before his murder. In it, she expressed her joy about their coming child and discussed their plans for the future. She wrote lovingly about their unborn daughter. She was somehow certain the child would be a girl, and how she would grow up to be a princess worthy of the kingdom. "Our little Isabella will be the most beautiful princess in all the lands," Victoria had written. "She has your noble heart already. I can feel it when she moves within me." The letter proved beyond any doubt that Princess Isabella was James Montclair's daughter, not Edmund's. The child who would someday inherit the throne had no legitimate claim to it whatsoever. Marcus carefully rewrapped the documents and hid them beneath his cloak, his mind racing with the implications.
Everything Lady Evangeline had told him was true.
The royal family he had served faithfully for 15 years was built on a foundation of murder and deception. Princess Isabella, whom he had watched grow from a baby into a bright, kind child, was living a lie without even knowing it. But what could he do with this knowledge? If he attempted to expose the truth through official channels, he would likely end up dead like Lord Westmere. The king's network of spies and assassins was clearly extensive, and Marcus had no way of knowing which nobles, guards, or officials were part of the conspiracy. As he made his way back through the archives, Marcus heard footsteps echoing from the stone corridor above. Someone else was moving through the palace at this late hour. He quickly extinguished his candle and pressed himself against the wall, listening carefully. The footsteps paused directly above where he stood, and he could hear muffled voices. 2 men were speaking. though their words were too quiet to understand clearly. After several minutes, the voices moved away, but Marcus remained hidden for another quarter hour to be certain they were gone. When he finally emerged from the archives, the palace was silent again. But as he made his way toward his quarters, Marcus noticed something that made his blood freeze. A guard was stationed outside his room. A guard who definitely had not been there when he left. Moving carefully through the shadows, Marcus circled around to approach his quarters from a different direction. Through a narrow window, he could see that his room had been searched. His belongings were scattered, his bed overturned, his personal documents spread across his desk. They were looking for something. Or someone had reported his suspicious behavior and ordered an investigation. Either way, his activities tonight had not gone unnoticed. Marcus retreated to a storage room he sometimes used for private meetings with his lieutenants. It was small and windowless, but it had a secure door and was unlikely to be searched. He settled in to wait for dawn and plan his next moves. The evidence he carried proved that King Edmund was a murderer who had built his reign on assassination and fraud. But how could Marcus use this information without getting himself and others killed in the process? He needed allies, people he could trust who would be willing to act on this devastating information. His thoughts turned to Lieutenant William Thorne, who had already proven himself willing to investigate questionable orders. There was also Master Sergeant Catherine Mills, a 20-year veteran who had served with honor and integrity throughout her career. And perhaps most importantly, there was someone else who deserved to know the truth about her parentage, even though she was only 12 years old. Princess Isabella had a right to know who her real father was. She had a right to understand that the man she called father was actually her father's murderer. But how could he tell a child something so devastating without destroying her completely? As dawn approached and Marcus heard the palace beginning to stir with the activities of a new day, he made a series of difficult decisions. First, he would approach Lieutenant Thorne and Master Sergeant Mills separately, sharing enough information to gauge their reactions without revealing everything immediately. If they proved trustworthy, he would bring them into his confidence. Second, he would need to ensure Lady Evangeline's safety. If his activities had been discovered, she might be in immediate danger of assassination to prevent her from revealing what she knew. Third, and most importantly, he would need to find a way to protect Princess Isabella. Whether she was Edmund's daughter or not, she was an innocent child caught in the middle of a deadly political conspiracy. If the truth about her parentage became public, her life would be in grave danger from those who wanted to eliminate any potential threats to the succession. Marcus carefully hid the documents in a secret compartment he had built into his armor chest years ago, a precaution he had never expected to need. Then he prepared for what would likely be the most dangerous day of his life. As he buckled on his sword belt and prepared to face whatever consequences awaited him, Marcus thought about the oath he had sworn when he first became a guard. He had promised to protect the innocent and uphold justice, no matter the personal cost. Today, that oath would be put to the ultimate test. The question was no longer whether he could remain loyal to the crown. It was whether he could remain loyal to his conscience while navigating the treacherous waters of palace intrigue. The real battle for the soul of the kingdom was about to begin, and Captain Marcus Kane found himself standing at the center of a conspiracy that could destroy everything he had ever believed in. But perhaps if he was clever and brave enough, he could also use that same conspiracy to save the kingdom from the monster who currently sat upon its throne. The morning sun had barely risen when Captain Marcus Kane was summoned to the king's private study. As he walked through the palace corridors, he noticed the increased security presence, additional guards at every doorway, and several men he didn't recognize wearing the dark blue uniforms of the king's personal agents. His room search had clearly triggered a broader security alert. King Edmund sat behind his massive oak desk, still wearing his nightrobe and looking as though he hadn't slept. His usually perfectly groomed hair was disheveled, and dark circles shadowed his eyes. Standing beside him was Lord Chancellor Blackwood, a thin, severe man whose loyalty to the crown was absolute and unquestioning. "Captain Kane," the king said without looking up from the documents spread across his desk, "thank you for coming so quickly." "Your Majesty?" Marcus replied, bowing formally while his eyes quickly scanned the room. He noticed that the documents on the desk appeared to be guard rotation schedules and security protocols, nothing that seemed immediately threatening. "I understand there was some unusual activity in the palace last night," King Edmund continued, finally raising his eyes to meet Marcus's gaze. "One of my night sentries reported seeing someone moving through the lower levels well after midnight." Marcus kept his expression neutral, though his heart was racing. "I wasn't informed of any security breaches, Your Majesty." "Should I conduct an investigation?" Lord Chancellor Blackwood stepped forward, his cold gray eyes fixed on Marcus with undisguised suspicion. "That won't be necessary, Captain. We've already identified the individual in question. Marcus felt sweat beading on his forehead despite the cool morning air. "Oh, it was you, Captain Kane," the king said quietly. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Marcus considered denying it, but he realized that would only make his situation worse. They clearly had evidence of his midnight journey to the archives. "Yes, Your Majesty," he admitted. "I was conducting a security inspection of the lower levels. Given recent events, I thought it prudent to ensure that all areas of the palace were properly secured." It was a reasonable explanation, and Marcus delivered it with conviction. King Edmund studied his face for a long moment before nodding slowly. "Of course. Your dedication to security is commendable as always." The king's tone was conversational, but there was something underneath it that made Marcus's skin crawl. "Tell me, Captain, what did you discover during your inspection?"
Nothing concerning, Your Majesty.
"All entry points were secure, and I found no evidence of unauthorized access." "And the archives? Did you inspect those as well?" Marcus's mouth went dry. They knew he had been in the archives specifically. "Yes, Your Majesty. I wanted to ensure that our historical records were properly protected." "Quite right," the king said, smiling in a way that didn't reach his eyes. "Our history is precious, isn't it? The chronicles of our royal line, the records of our ancestors' great deeds. Such documents must be protected from those who might misunderstand or misinterpret them." The threat was subtle but unmistakable. Marcus realized that the king suspected exactly what he had found in the archives, but for some reason wasn't ready to act on those suspicions directly. "Lord Chancellor Blackwood has been reviewing our security protocols," the king continued, "and he's identified some areas where we might streamline our operations." Blackwood opened a leather portfolio and withdrew several documents. "Captain Kane, effective immediately, you're being relieved of your duties regarding the prisoner, Lady Evangeline Ashford. Security for the dungeon area will be handled directly by the king's personal guard." Marcus felt panic rising in his chest. If Lady Evangeline was moved to the personal guard's control, she would certainly be dead within days. "Your Majesty, with respect, I was given direct orders to oversee the lady's security. Has there been some problem with my handling of the situation?"
Not at all, the king said smoothly.
"But Lord Blackwood feels that the sensitivity of this case requires a different approach. Lady Ashford has made serious accusations against the crown, and we need to ensure that she's handled by personnel with absolute loyalty and discretion." The implication was clear. Marcus's loyalty was now in question. He needed to respond carefully to avoid confirming their suspicions while somehow protecting Lady Evangeline. "I understand, Your Majesty. However, I should point out that Lady Ashford has been showing signs of illness."
If she's going to be moved to different security, the new guard should be briefed on her medical condition.
It was a calculated risk.
By mentioning her illness, Marcus was indirectly letting them know that he was aware of the poisoning attempts without directly accusing anyone. King Edmund and Lord Blackwood exchanged a quick glance that confirmed Marcus's worst fears. "What sort of illness?" the king asked with feigned concern. "Symptoms consistent with digestive distress, weakness, occasional confusion." "It could be stress-related or possibly something she's consumed."
Marcus delivered this information while maintaining steady eye contact with the king.
"I've taken the precaution of having her meals prepared by the kitchen staff I trust most." Another meaningful glance passed between the king and his chancellor. They now knew that Marcus was aware of the poisoning and had taken steps to prevent it. "How thoughtful of you," the king said after a pause. "Well, I'm sure the new guards will take equally good care of her health and well-being." Marcus realized that he had probably just signed Lady Evangeline's death warrant. By revealing that he knew about the poisoning, he had forced their hand. They would now need to act quickly before word of their assassination attempt could spread. "There is one other matter, Captain," Lord Blackwood said, consulting his documents again. "We're implementing new security protocols for all senior guard personnel. Effective immediately, you'll be restricted to the upper levels of the palace. No more nighttime inspections of the archives or dungeon areas. And," the king added, "you'll be accompanied by 2 of my personal agents during your duties. For your own protection, of course. Recent events have shown that there may be conspirators within the palace who pose a danger to loyal servants of the crown." Marcus understood perfectly. He was now under house arrest in all but name. The 2 protective agents would be watching his every move, ensuring he couldn't interfere with whatever plans they had for Lady Evangeline or continue his investigation into the king's crimes. "I appreciate Your Majesty's concern for my safety," Marcus said carefully. "May I ask how long these security measures will remain in effect?" "Until we're satisfied that all threats to the crown have been eliminated," the king replied. "I'm sure you understand the necessity." As Marcus was escorted from the king's study by 2 stone-faced agents, his mind was racing with desperate plans. He had perhaps hours before Lady Evangeline would be killed, and his own movements were now severely restricted. He needed to get word to Lieutenant Thorne and Master Sergeant Mills, but how could he do so without arousing suspicion? The answer came to him as they passed through the main courtyard, where the morning shift change was taking place. Among the guards reporting for duty was Private Sarah Hendricks, a young woman who had served under Marcus for 2 years. She was intelligent, observant, and completely trustworthy. More importantly, she was in love with Lieutenant Thorne, though both of them thought their attraction was secret. "Agents," Marcus said to his escorts, "I need to conduct the morning briefing with my staff. It's part of the standard security protocol." The agents conferred quietly, then nodded.
They would allow him to perform his normal duties as long as they could observe. During the briefing, Marcus made several subtle gestures that he had trained his senior staff to recognize, signals indicating the need for discreet communication.
Private Hendricks caught his meaning immediately, as did Master Sergeant Mills. "Private Hendricks," Marcus said in a normal tone, "I need you to conduct a security sweep of the East Wing. Pay particular attention to the servants' quarters. We've had reports of unauthorized personnel in that area." The East Wing contained Lieutenant Thorne's quarters, and the mention of unauthorized personnel was a code phrase Marcus had established years ago to indicate urgent, sensitive information that needed to be communicated discreetly. "Master Sergeant Mills," he continued, "I want you to review the duty rosters for any irregularities. Check particularly for personnel who might have been assigned duties outside their normal expertise." Mills nodded, understanding that she was being asked to identify guards who might be working for the King's personal intelligence network, rather than following normal military protocols. As the briefing concluded and the guards dispersed to their duties, Marcus felt a small measure of hope. His loyal officers would understand that something was seriously wrong, and they would find ways to communicate despite his restricted circumstances. But time was running out. Even now, Lady Evangeline might be facing her final hours. The evidence he had discovered in the archives proved that King Edmund was a murderer. But unless he could find a way to act on that knowledge, more innocent people would die. That afternoon, as Marcus performed his restricted duties under the watchful eyes of his escorts, he noticed increased activity around the dungeon entrance. Guards he didn't recognize were carrying supplies down the stone steps, cleaning materials, tools, and what appeared to be materials for construction work. His blood ran cold as he realized what he was seeing. They were preparing to make Lady Evangeline's death appear to be an escape attempt gone wrong. The cleaning materials would remove evidence of poisoning, the tools would be used to damage the cell bars to suggest she had tried to break out, and the construction materials would allow them to stage whatever scene would best support their false narrative. By tomorrow morning, Lady Evangeline Ashford would be dead, and the official story would be that she had died while attempting to escape from the dungeon. Any evidence she might have provided would be dismissed as the desperate lies of a traitor who had died trying to flee justice. Marcus forced himself to remain calm and continue his duties, but inside he was screaming with frustration and rage. The woman who had risked everything to expose the truth was about to be murdered, and he was powerless to stop it, unless he could find a way to turn the king's own paranoia against him. As the sun set over Baldoria Palace, Captain Marcus Kane began to formulate the most dangerous plan of his life. It would require incredible timing, absolute trust from his remaining loyal officers, and a willingness to risk everything on a single desperate gambit. But if it worked, it might not only save Lady Evangeline's life, it might also expose King Edmund's crimes to the entire kingdom and ensure that justice was finally served. The question was whether he could execute such a complex plan while under constant surveillance, and whether his allies would be willing to commit what would certainly be viewed as treason against the crown.
As night fell and the palace settled into its evening routines, Marcus realized that tomorrow would either see the beginning of a new, honest era for the kingdom, or it would witness the final victory of a murderous tyrant who had built his throne on the graves of innocent people. The fate of the kingdom now rested in the hands of a handful of loyal guards who would have to choose between following orders and following their consciences.
And at the center of it all was a 12-year-old girl who had no idea that her entire life was built on a foundation of lies and blood. The bells of Valdoria Palace chimed midnight as Captain Marcus Kane executed the most dangerous plan of his military career. Using a series of hand signals visible only to those who knew to look for them, he had managed to communicate with Lieutenant Thorne and Master Sergeant Mills throughout the day. Now, as the palace settled into its nighttime routines, his carefully orchestrated plan was about to unfold. The first phase involved Private Sarah Hendricks, who had volunteered for night watch duty in the East Wing.
At precisely 12:15, she would discover a security breach in the servants' quarters, a broken window that suggested someone had entered the palace from outside. This would draw the king's personal agents away from Marcus, giving him a brief window of opportunity. As expected, when Private Hendricks raised the alarm about the security breach, both of Marcus's escorts immediately rushed to investigate. Palace security protocols demanded that all potential infiltration attempts be treated as serious threats, especially given the recent tensions. The moment his escorts disappeared around the corner, Marcus moved. He had memorized the guard rotations and knew that he had exactly 7 minutes before the next patrol would pass through this corridor. Moving with the silence of a trained soldier, he made his way toward the dungeon entrance. Master Sergeant Mills was waiting for him at the top of the stone steps, her weathered face grim with determination. "Captain, the situation below is worse than we thought. They brought in specialists from outside the palace, men who don't wear uniforms and don't answer to normal military command. Assassins," Marcus said quietly. "That would be my assessment."
Lieutenant Thorne managed to get close enough to overhear part of their conversation. "They're planning to stage Lady Ashford's death within the next 2 hours. Marcus felt his jaw clench with anger. What's their cover story? Escape attempt gone wrong.
They're going to claim she attacked a guard with a makeshift weapon and that she died when he defended himself. It was a believable story, and one that would effectively end any investigation into Lady Evangeline's accusations. Dead traitors couldn't provide testimony, and any evidence she might have presented could be dismissed as fabricated.
Where's Lieutenant Thorne now? Stationed at the alternate entrance to the dungeon level. If we can create enough chaos down there, he might be able to extract Lady Ashford through the old wine cellar passage." Marcus nodded, remembering the forgotten tunnel that connected the dungeons to the wine storage areas. It had been built centuries ago to allow discreet removal of political prisoners, but it had fallen into disuse and was no longer guarded. "What about the evidence I found in the archives?" Master Sergeant Mills smiled grimly and patted a leather satchel slung across her shoulder. "Safe and secure.
Private Hendricks managed to retrieve it from your quarters during the security sweep. If we can get Lady Ashford to safety, we'll have both the witness and the documentary proof needed to expose the king's crimes."
The sound of footsteps echoing from above made them both freeze. Marcus's escorts were returning from their investigation of the false security breach.
"Go," Marcus whispered urgently. "Execute the plan. I'll rejoin you as soon as I can." Mills disappeared down the stone steps just as the two agents rounded the corner. They looked suspicious and angry, clearly frustrated by the false alarm that had drawn them away from their primary duty. "Captain Kane," one of them said coldly, "you were supposed to remain in the main corridor." "I heard the security alert and came to investigate," Marcus replied smoothly. "As head of palace security, I need to assess any potential threats personally."
The agents exchanged glances, clearly debating whether to believe him.
Finally, the taller one nodded curtly. "In the future, please inform us before moving to investigate security situations."
"Our orders are to remain with you at all times."
"Of course," Marcus agreed, while mentally counting down the minutes until Mills and Thorne would begin their rescue attempt. 20 minutes later, chaos erupted throughout the palace. It began with a fire alarm in the kitchen, a carefully set blaze that Master Sergeant Mills had ignited using cooking oil and furnace coals. The fire was real but contained, designed to create smoke and panic rather than actual destruction. Within minutes, guards and servants were running through the corridors, some fighting the fire while others evacuated the affected areas. In the confusion, Marcus's escorts were torn between their duty to watch him and their instinct to respond to the emergency. When a messenger arrived reporting that the fire was spreading and all available personnel were needed to prevent disaster, the agents made the decision Marcus had hoped for.
"Captain Kane, you'll come with us to help coordinate the emergency response," the taller agent ordered. "But you're not to leave our sight." As they hurried toward the kitchen area, Marcus caught a glimpse of Lieutenant Thorne moving in the opposite direction, toward the dungeon entrance.
The rescue attempt was underway. The kitchen fire created exactly the distraction Marcus had hoped for. Palace guards, who might normally be stationed at critical security points, were instead forming bucket brigades and moving furniture away from the flames.
The specialized assassins who had been brought in to kill Lady Evangeline found themselves pressed into service as firefighters, their carefully planned operation disrupted by the need to respond to an immediate crisis. During the confusion, Marcus managed to slip away from his escorts.
In the smoke and noise of the fire response, it took them several minutes to realize he was gone. By the time they began searching for him, he was already making his way through the palace's hidden passages toward the old wine cellar. He found Lieutenant Thorne waiting in the ancient stone corridor that connected the cellar to the dungeon level. The younger officer's face was streaked with soot and sweat, but his eyes were bright with success. "We got her out," Thorne reported quietly. "Master Sergeant Mills is with her now, moving through the servants' quarters toward the stable. But Captain, there's something else you need to know. What? When we reached Lady Ashford's cell, we discovered we weren't the only ones planning a rescue attempt tonight.
Marcus stared at him in confusion.
What do you mean? Princess Isabella was there. The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. What? The princess had somehow gotten into the dungeon ahead of us.
She was in Lady Ashford's cell trying to help her escape. Apparently, she's been visiting the lady secretly for the past 2 days, bringing her food and water to counteract the poisoning. Marcus felt the world spinning around him. How does she know about the poisoning? Lady Ashford told her. And more than that, she told the princess everything. About Lord Montclair being her real father, about the king's crimes, about why she was really imprisoned.
The implications were staggering. Princess Isabella now knew that the man she had called father her entire life was actually her father's murderer.
She knew that her claim to the throne was illegitimate, that her entire life had been built on lies. Where is she now? That's the problem, Thorne said grimly.
She refused to come with us. She said she had to confront the king directly, to demand answers about her real father's death. Marcus felt ice forming in his veins.
She's going to confront King Edmund? Tonight?
She left the dungeon about 10 minutes before we arrived. Master Sergeant Mills tried to follow her, but the princess knows the palace better than any of us. She could be anywhere by now.
The fire alarm was still ringing throughout the palace, but Marcus barely heard it over the pounding of his own heartbeat. A 12-year-old girl was about to confront a murderous king with accusations that could destroy his reign.
Edmund would have no choice but to silence her permanently, daughter or not. We have to find her, Marcus said, already moving toward the stairs that would take them back to the main palace levels.
Captain, what about Lady Ashford? She's safe for now. But if we don't get her out of the kingdom soon, the king's agents will track her down.
Marcus paused, torn between his duty to protect the woman who had risked everything to expose the truth, and his desperate need to save the innocent child who was walking into mortal danger. Take 2 of our most trusted guards and escort Lady Ashford to the safe house outside the city, he ordered. Make sure she and the evidence are secure. I'll find Princess Isabella. As they separated, each heading toward their desperate missions, Marcus realized that the next few hours would determine not just their own fates, but the fate of the entire kingdom. If Princess Isabella confronted the king before Marcus could reach her, she would almost certainly be killed.
If Lady Evangeline was recaptured before she could present her evidence to the outside world, the truth would die with her.
And if Marcus failed in both objectives, King Edmund would emerge from this night stronger than ever, having eliminated both his accusers and any witnesses to his crimes. Racing through the smoke-filled corridors of Valdoria Palace, Marcus could only pray that a lifetime of military training and a desperate parent's love for an innocent child would be enough to overcome a killer king's ruthless determination to protect his stolen throne. The final confrontation was about to begin, and everything Marcus had ever believed about honor, duty, and justice would be put to the ultimate test. In the growing chaos of fire and rebellion, the truth would finally emerge, but whether it would bring justice or just more death remained to be seen.
As he ran toward what might be his final battle, Captain Marcus Kane could hear Princess Isabella's young voice echoing in his memory from happier times. "Captain Kane, do you think my father is the bravest king who ever lived?" Now he knew the terrible answer to that innocent question, and he was racing against time to prevent that knowledge from destroying the child who had asked it.
Royal Guard sends Camilla to prison. She dares to spit at Princess Charlotte.